Mark Beall, President of Government Affairs at the AI Policy Network, joining me now while we get your calls lined up on the other issues. Federal AI proposal that could certainly be contradictory or counter to or upend state and local regulations. One of the debates about regulating AI. Mark, thank you for joining me on the program. So let's talk about this, state versus federal.
Hey, David. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting situation we have going on here. The federal government has been kind of navel gazing at this issue now for a number of years and hasn't done much. And I think we've seen states step into the breach and start to work on issues protecting children and families from deep fake porn, from all other kinds of misuse of AI. And then we see in the big, beautiful bill the appearance of this kind of big tech giveaway that says for 10 years there'll be a federal preemption of states' rights. And fascinating is to see, the kind of response to this. Like, not only has MAGA kind of spoken and said, we care about the Constitution, we care about states' rights, we care about the 10th Amendment, but also, the Catholic Church and the evangelical community, people like Bernie Sanders, people like AOC, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, the House Freedom Caucus, Steve Bannon. There's a pretty big and growing, outrage at this idea. It'd be interesting to see how Congress responds.
Well, look, this is one that is frankly, I'll even say beyond me. The regulation framework is part of this, that trying to regulate AI is so complex, whether it's within, of course, it's not limited to a state because obviously it resides, not within the physical boundaries of a state. Is this difficulty really one that we have to say may not have a perfect answer?
I think that's a fair point, David, and certainly that like the internet, and like social media, these things kind of transcend state boundaries. But the major AI companies are usually in at least one state, and they have some presence on the ground. But to your point, this is a very technical and complex and very high velocity issue. And I think that's why folks like the House Freedom Caucus probably want to see a little bit more flexibility at the state level, because, as you know, the states do kind of serve as laboratories of democracy, and they can be innovative in their different approaches, and we can kind of tailor our approach and figure out what's going to be the right answer here. And I think the idea of sort of doing nothing at the federal level for 10 years in the context in which this technology is moving so fast and could become potentially quite dangerous. This is I think a big issue.
And then, of course, you get into the fight of supremacy when it comes to interstate commerce, or in this case, of course, cyberspace. To be fair, I don't think anyone has the perfect answer to this, state level or federal.
Yeah, it's tough because on one hand you have this technology, as powerful as it already has become, it is actually still quite new, and we don't want to necessarily prematurely stifle innovation. And then at the same time, we've already sort of seen evidence of really bad things happening. For example, there was a gentleman who was down at Disney World who was filming children and then going back and using AI to create pornographic images of those children. Thankfully, authorities arrested him. You have people who have developed inappropriate relationships with these chatbots and then gone ahead and committed suicide at the urging of these things. So we've already seen some real impacts on our families and communities, and it's sort of hard to argue that there should be nothing that gets done for a period like 10 years while this issue is kind of percolating so quickly.
Is there any path, and I mean any path, to a cooperative structure between federal, state, and I don't know if you want to say every AI company, but the major players in the AI space to create, whether it's an evolving set of standards, a minimum set of standards, and some kind of, I would say, a memorandum of understanding approach to this?
Yeah, that would be, I think, an excellent path forward. And, getting folks together to hammer out what a light touch sort of guardrails need to look like to make sure that we're promoting innovation, but also protecting the folks. I think this is a really important step forward. And, one opportunity potentially that comes about as a result of this 10-year preemption idea is the potential for a negotiation to happen that could, expose a good path forward that sort of serves the interests of the people first and foremost.
I know it's a bit Pollyannish what I just laid out, but I have to say that this is moving faster than government and private sector combined. And how many times do you see that?
It's very, very infrequently. In fact, I can't think of another example. And, I don't think that you're being Pollyannish on this. I think, if you look at the polling and if you look at sort of the messaging coming off Capitol Hill, you start to see this issue transcend politics in ways that I haven't really seen another issue do. The parties themselves haven't sort of figured out exactly what it is they think about the various pieces of this issue. So I think there might be room here for a bit more of a grand bargain and a national dialogue on, what it is that we should do about this incredibly transformative technology. And by the way, where this is going, like these AI companies, they want to build superhuman AI systems that could basically do all the jobs and take all the money and potentially pose significant threats to public safety if it were to get out of their control. And so, if this kind of capability comes online like these guys think in the next few years, then, the very assumptions that underpin our Constitution, that underpin the free market itself, may be challenged in significant ways. And I do think we definitely need a national conversation about how to govern this technology appropriately.
One of the concerns, Mark, is obviously competition. If the bigger companies have too much influence, smaller innovators may not be able to, show their wares, what they're capable of doing. Is there a path or any possibility of separating what we're talking about, which is a framework I'll stick with MOU, on how it should happen from the technology and development side of it, but also strengthen the punitive for the illegal activity, whether at the state or federal level? And is that a possible approach? Because if you can't bring it all together, and that doesn't seem to be the case here, then you can make sure you strengthen laws for punishment for bad behavior, whether it's an individual or a company. There are already some existing laws under FTC, under others, commerce laws and more, and of course criminal law, and at the same time have that MOU side of it on the technology and development.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think, one of the thorniest issues on this topic is issues around liability. If who owns the risk? In fact, on the innovation side, one of the biggest impediments to large companies adopting these capabilities is the lack of clarity on federal liability. And, I think folks don't want to see a situation in which we create a feasting for the trial attorneys and there's all kinds of frivolous lawsuits. At the same time, there needs to be accountability because the technology is so powerful and can cause so much damage. We need to have some rules of the road in place. And that would be a perfectly appropriate thing for the federal government to get serious about.
I think I'm on the side of just ripping this out of the bill, dealing with it separately. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you have to do that at this stage.
Sometimes you can't lump everything together. Hey, look, I'm the first one to admit I am no expert in this field, but I do understand policy, and sometimes it's not all encompassing. Sometimes it doesn't need to be. And one of the hardest things in state and federal is an evolving policy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, I think this one is so important to the future of America, to the future of our Constitution and the future of the welfare of our people, that it's worth not just kind of shoehorning it into a larger issue, but to sort of separate that out, focus on it, bring the stakeholders together and come to an agreement on what the guardrails can be. Because I think if, MAGA has sort of spoken on this, and we'd love to see, this conversation continue to advance.
All right, let's talk one area that I know you have a lot of experience in, and that is in the national security defense sector. You were the former Pentagon AI policy director. And of course, our enemies, not just competitors out there, not adversaries, our enemies are using AI. How do we best use AI in our both offensive and defensive military environment?
That is probably the most important question for 20th century or 21st century national security. I think there's sort of two core pieces to this puzzle, David. The first piece is we have to stop hemorrhaging our advantage to our adversaries overseas. The way that folks like the Chinese People's Liberation Army have up-armed using AI has mostly been on the backs of American technology companies. They're buying, they're downloading, they're stealing our capabilities, and then they're weaponizing them against American forces. Like, we have to sort of close the loopholes that allow companies to sort of sell to China and do whatever they want with China, because this is like too important to let like just the business interests here drive the conversation. The national security voice has to be heard. The second thing we have to get serious about is deploying AI in the context of the federal government, being careful that we don't like overdo this and create this deep state AI-enabled surveillance monster, but do so in ways that have good guardrails, but that allow people in DoD, people in that are responsible for being America's sentinels and guardians, to take advantage of the capabilities that exist today and to do their jobs more efficiently and more effectively and at a lower cost.
All good points, all solid points. Mark Beall, President of Government Affairs at the AI Policy Network, former Pentagon AI Policy Director. It's evolving. Let's see what they do in the big, beautiful bill, Mark, but I say we've got to keep a close eye on this. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Have a great day.
Their website, theaipn.org, the AI Policy Network. And again, Mark Beall, President of Government Affairs and former Pentagon AI Policy Director.